welcome to The Wellness Effect. We all know that generic medication is cheaper, but why? We look into this and more in today's episode. To unpack this topic, we have Muhammed Vally in the studio with us today. He is the head of clinical pharmacy and a lecturer at Wits University. Welcome, Muhammed.
Thank you for having me.
The big question today, Muhammed, is generic versus original. Talk us through the pros and the cons.
So obviously the originator product was the first one that came onto the market,
Sure.
right? So from that, in that particular perspective, it generally has brand recognition, right?
Hmm.
And that's basically what people mostly think about it from that perspective. In terms of generic products, on the other hand, they tend to be the kinds of products that are much cheaper,
Sure.
right? And the reason for them actually being cheaper is actually because there's less research and development costs involved, right?
Okay.
That's one of the main reasons.
Okay.
And it becomes much easier to get the raw ingredients, etc. So as a result of that, generics are generally cheaper than the originator product over a period of time.
And for those who are on chronic medication, um, are generics perfectly fine, or should they continue with branded ones?
So those who are on chronic medications can swap to generic medicines, and that's perfectly acceptable. And generally in South Africa, we're very blessed by having the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, and they actually will register generic medicines and make sure that they are equivalent to the originator brand.
And it doesn't affect their quality of life, etc.
It shouldn't affect the quality of life, but obviously everybody is different, right?
Yes.
So as a result of that, sometimes you will find that patients tend to feel different in some
Hmm.
situations. Obviously, there is the chance that a patient may actually be affected by a genetic medicine in terms of having an allergic reaction
Yes.
uh, to certain of the excipients. Now, excipients are basically the other components of a tablet that are not actually the active ingredient, so not
Mm.
the active drug that the patient is taking.
Mm.
Generally, in some cases, you will find that generic products use different excipients from the originator brand, obviously. With time and with a lot of testing, the generic companies tend to find which excipients work best for them. So then they put that in. But that's about the only chance that I would think where somebody might have a problem switching from an originator product to a generic product.
Mm. And you talked about regulatory bodies. How do they ensure that generic medication is at the same standard as the higher brands?
So what happens is that regulatory bodies are required by law, or in the case of South Africa, and as well as other regulatory bodies, they are required by law to register medicines that are what they call bioequivalent.
Okay.
Now, bioequivalence basically means that the drug will be released in the same way at the same time and absorbed the same way in your body as the originator brand.
So, Mohammed, why do people kind of have this view that generic medication is at a lower standard to the well-known brands?
So I think that a lot of this has to do with how the originator brands are generally advertised or explained to patients when they initially take the originator product, right? In general terms, though, what has been found in the literature when you look and you do the research, right, is that when patients initially swap from the originator brand to a generic brand, at the beginning, they feel negatively towards it.
Mm.
But as time goes on, they tend to change that negative opinion and it becomes more positive. So it's just a question of changing over. And once you change over, then generally people tend to be happy with actually taking the generic brand versus the originator brand.
So you've mentioned something that I would just love some clarification. So there's no medical difference between
There's
the
no
generic.
pharmaceutical difference. Yes,
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
No pharmaceutical between the generic and the well-known brands.
Especially if it's been registered by a regulatory body. Yes.
Amazing. And the well-known brands is it's just purely advertising that
Well, I
makes
mean,
them.
you must understand that when a company decides that they're going to actually make a particular product, let's say they want to make a product to manage high blood pressure,
Yes.
because we're talking about chronic diseases, then the time that is spent actually researching, coming up with a novel drug or new
Hmm.
molecule to be able to do that, all that has to be paid.
I
The
see.
generic company is coming in already knowing what the drug is, how it works, and all of that, right? So they have cut those costs in half. They've almost like completely removed them. All they're doing is buying the active ingredient, making the particular medicine, and then that's it.
Hmm. So we've talked about regulatory bodies, but how do people check if this generic medication is registered?
Well, within South Africa, you will find that on the box, it will actually give you a registration number for the particular medicine, as well as what schedule the medicine falls into as well. And that's generally required by law. So you'll be able to look that particular information up on the box of the medicine. Speaking generally, in South Africa as well, if you are buying a medicine from a pharmacy, you will definitely be buying a medicine that's registered in the country.
So South Africa has great regulatory bodies in place to kind of ensure that generic medication meets a certain standard. What about the rest of the world? Is it safe to take generic medication in the UK, the US?
It actually is. And the nice thing about the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, or SAPRA as they're known, and the other ones like the FDA or the EMCA, all of them, right? Generally speaking, they all talk to one another.
Amazing.
So they will all communicate with one another exactly about the different medicines. So, and they've got agreements in place nowadays so that if one is registered in one country, right, what can happen is the generic product can be registered within South Africa, right? And they will look at the information that was given to those countries as well as information that was provided here within South Africa. And then they will make a decision based on that.
This has been such an informative conversation. I think for myself, I always had the view that branded medication was more superior than generic.
Well, it's funny you should say that actually, right? Because it depends where you go around the world, right? There are
Mm,
people who have your perception or your viewpoint, and then there are other people who don't, right? So, for example, if you go to the US, people generally would not trust a generic medicine and would trust a branded name, right? And
mm,
also, you must understand that in the US, medicines are advertised directly to the public. So, when a
correct.
new product comes out, that's what will generally happen. Whereas if you go to a country like Lebanon, for example, approximately 50% of patients or more will be completely okay with a substitution to a generic medicine.
Mm.
So it's all about where you go around the world.
Mohammed, thank you for this great conversation. I think you've demystified and also challenged our perceptions around generic medication and branded medication. So thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.
Please subscribe so you can experience future episodes. I look forward to seeing you next time on The Wellness Effect. BankMed, the medical scheme of choice for the financial services industry. The Wellness Effect is proudly brought to you by BankMed, yours in good health.